very much, Mike. I think we've got time for a couple of questions. I've got a couple of questions I wouldn't mind asking you. That was very interesting. It's good to hear from Mark as well. It's looking slightly two-dimensional today. Firstly, the dynamic model that you talk about, that looks quite sophisticated. How do you get an organisation to adopt that level of sophistication in terms of its modelling? What's the journey and what foundations do you need in place?
Yes, it's a good question, Julian. It's actually the sort of technical sophistication of actually just getting that long-term base. It's not overly technical, but I think it's important that the company understands the mixed modeling that they have in place, the more conventional mixed modeling, so that they're fully buying into it, they trust it. In the case of Direct Line Group, actually, we're working with them for a number of years, refining those models, so we're doing it by risk segment for them, by age profile, supplementing it with a lot of geo-testing as well for certain media channels. So that had proven itself to the point that there was no sort of dispute about the modeling before we then advanced onto the dynamic modeling in the long term. The key technical thing is you're just relaxing the intercept constraint, and then you're explaining that growth through time. And say you're explaining it through what we call a structural model, which just in principle is, what's the best way of describing it? Something that's come from the social sciences, so that if perhaps 10 years ago when the financial crisis happened, there might be a headline in different economies in the West that said, there's going to be a recession, therefore there's going to be more crime. But the social scientists will get all of the data and say, well, actually what will happen is that people may lose their jobs, they will default on their mortgages, there'll be a home breakup, there'll be truancy from school, there'll be more drug dependency, and that results in more crime. So you get the pathway of how you get there, and we're applying that principle through the brand KPIs to get the answer of what's driving the long term.
Okay, thank you, that's very helpful. Obviously, Direct Line Group is measuring the short-term and long-term effects, and we heard Mark talking about that. Amongst your other clients and in your perception of the industry, is that quite an unusual position to take, that they're so focused on understanding the long-term and then feeding that into their creative and their brand positioning?
It is quite unusual to actually measure it. I think a lot of companies that we work with, or I've worked with in the past, we all know that different media campaigns have a long-term effect, but it's largely done through faith. You're shifting brand metrics, and there is a belief that it has an impact on the long term, but without actually creating that direct line of sight, it is significantly less convincing to the board to put millions of pounds into brand campaigns, and it ultimately results in the situation that actually brand building, high awareness, high reach media has reduced as part of the total pie, and a number of businesses are suffering as a consequence of that.
Okay, all right. Well, I think that's very interesting. Thanks again for your presentation. Really enjoyed that, being so open and candid with us. It's really good to see how you've done that over time and progressed things. And it really shows the power of having a holistic model in terms of companies being able to address those strategic questions. So thank you very much, Mr. Mike Campbell.